July 19, 2019. We just arrived at one of my favorite spots, mystery spots they call it, the Mima Mounds. This park is located outside of Olympia. These mounds are unique to other mounds as they are not man-made. Oh, it's about a half-mile walk from the entrance. Jeff dropped me off, which I'm very glad because I get to look at all the plant life here. And this is the Washington State berry. Oh, and this plant here is called the duckfoot, I believe. I can hear Jeff speaking to someone. I noticed a car from Minnesota drive by. So we're in the parking lot, and you'll see that we're surrounded by conifer trees. And look how forested it looks, and then as you come through this trail, you see all the trees have disappeared. So scientists do know that the glacier, after the glacier melt and the prairies formed, as the weather was hot, there was drought about 10,000 years ago. And then as the weather started changing 5,000 years ago, wetter and cooler, then the trees started to come in. Here's a stone at the marquee stating it's a registered national landmark. And they still do have some controlled burning. The controlled burning helps the seeds, because there's flowers that grow along these prairies. And actually, the native people, they lived here. They lived off the land. They ate the flowers, and actually there were acorns. So as we enter inside, you'll see the prairie mound here. The interesting thing is the trees grow on top of the mounds. And some of the mounds have been actually denuded of the trees. So here's the marquee, and they have all kinds of information, a few of the stories. Okay, so what we know for sure, Mima Mounds were formed after the ice glaciers receded. So here's a picture of the structure. Just says they're made of, soils are black, around the gravel, sandy loam mixed together, 8 to 40 feet across. Oh, and 1 to 7 feet in height. So here's around the United States where other mounds would be in North America. See, so California,
Texas, Oklahoma, Louisiana, Colorado.
right? And we just met someone in the parking lot who was from Texas, and they said that they've seen the mounds down there. She said South Texas. So all the earlier explorers attributed this to water, but one fellow in 1841, an explorer, thought that maybe they were burial sites, but he dug them up and he found no remains, no bones. So the fact that water played a huge role in the formation of these mounds goes back to a folk tale told by the Salish Indians, who are the coastal Indians here. And there was a woman named Thrush, and she was a great disgrace to the tribe because she wouldn't wash her face. But she wouldn't wash her face because she said, if I do, something will happen to the earth. Eventually, she did wash her face, and the water just kept falling and falling until the whole And then the water receded, and when it did, you can still see the waves and the land and the prairie here. So this is an overlook. It's a little higher than the wall. One explorer said he traveled 22 miles with these mounds.
It's Friday, July 19th, 2019. I'm standing at the overlook at the primary Mima Mounds Center here in Olympia, Washington. The mounds themselves run some 20 or 30 miles, like an archipelago across the region, all the way to Spanaway. And we have some young visitors. Hello, guys. If you look at the pattern of the mounds, it's clear that there's a wave-like pattern to them. And that wave-like pattern could be caused by the air, or more likely like by water. Over 100 years ago, it was speculated that these mounds and related mounds in other locations came about as a result of a great efflux of water due to the melting of glaciers. And that glacier melt basically created a resonance pattern which removed soil from some areas and transported it to others. This is pretty clearly seen here in the region around us. Now, the interesting question then becomes, what could have caused such a rapid melt-off of the glaciers that would result in a great efflux of waters? And the answer has been revealed in the last 3 years. The answer for the great melt-off was that a comet struck Greenland 12,800 years ago at what is known as the Younger Dryas boundary, a minor period of rapid change in the history of the planet. When that comet struck, it hit with such force that the surface of the Earth glowed with the intensity of the sun. This has been seen before in the 1990s when the Shoemaker-Levy comet struck the limb of Jupiter, and NASA gave imagery up of this strike. It was awe-inspiring. The amount of energy released would have almost, within a day or two, released all the water in the temperate glaciers that populated North America at the time. This area here would have been right at the fringes of this release of water as the glaciers melted. There would have been a huge slurping and sloshing of the melt as it flowed back down towards the Puget Sound, which is located within 10 miles of this particular location. And, by the way, is the rim around which the various other mound archipelagos exist in the region from Rochester, Washington to Spanaway, Washington. Now, the interesting thing about such a melt-off, rapid melt-off, is that the sea levels of the Earth would have raised between 300 and 400 feet, which leads us to the next revelation that comes out of this particular experience, that the continental coasts would have extended much further out into the Atlantic Ocean than they do now, perhaps 200 or 300 miles out into the ocean. And we all know where people like to live. As I walk these pathways amongst the mounds, I can only imagine what might have happened in a day or two due to a massive release of heat as a 1-kilometer comet struck the glaciers in Greenland. Within a day or two, the sea levels would have risen 300 to 400 feet. While the continental shelf off the Pacific side of the North American continent is fairly sheer, that on the Atlantic side is very gradual. We can imagine the continental shelf extending out several hundred miles away from the current coastline of the eastern United States. Archaeological information has indicated that human beings have populated the North American continent since about 110,000 years ago, much earlier than the time that we had been taught about as kids in school, in which a land bridge existed between Siberia and Alaska. Certainly there was a wave of migration onto the North American continent at that time, but apparently there had been an earlier wave of migration to North America 100,000 years earlier. We can imagine then that there was potentially a very advanced culture living on the continental shelf of the eastern United States, of eastern North America. We can imagine that culture achieving any possibilities of technological advance. We can imagine that they may very well have developed capacities which later led to the erection of the pyramids in both North and South America and throughout the planet, especially in Egypt. We can imagine that this culture had mastered the ability to render weightless huge stone blocks and to easily move them into position to build huge edifices and structures such as Baalbek in Turkey. We can imagine that such a culture came swiftly to an end as an icy ball raced towards the earth from somewhere along the ecliptic, striking the Greenland ice sheet, leaving a 32-kilometer wide crater, releasing such heat and such intensity as to melt the glaciers and completely submerge that culture into the Atlantic Ocean. And today, we see few remnants of that culture flying in Earth's skies in the form of UFOs.